me a minute.
Or not. Wait for Lee.
Yeah, everyone has to wait for me.
You've had so much time to prepare, Lee. What
I've
you
been
doing?
sick. I've had a literal sick day. You shut up.
You fine yesterday.
Yeah, well, shut up. It was gestating. Where is it? SourceForge? Is that still a thing? No, GitHub.
GitHub.
/roller derby / that'll do. Scoreboard. Is there a jar I download or something?
No, you download. I did a video like 3 hours ago.
I've been off sick. Zip file.
No, download the folder, extract it as long as you've got Java installed.
Yep. I don't need to compile it, right?
You do not need to compile it, no. You go to
Aw,
releases.
all the fun taken away. Come on, you virus checker shit. Okay, I guess you could start.
Thanks, Lee.
No problem.
Right. CRG is not as terrifying as people think it looks. Let me share my screen. Share my whole screen, which is massive. Right. So I did a quick video earlier on how CRG works, or how CRG you get to this point. Oh God, my brain is not working. Words. I'll start with hello. I'm Mademoiselle. I am one of the WFTDA's games data managers, which means I'm a roadie who looks after the IT at tournaments, is the best way to describe it. I have been doing this for a while. I too thought that CRG and scoreboarding was terrifying because it looks it, especially when you look at all the buttons you have to play it with. Let me load it again. Totes Profesh. Let's load mech. So if I start a new game with 2 random teams, just to get it up. There's a lot of buttons there. That's quite intimidating. And honestly, the biggest takeaway from all of this is to run sanctioned roller derby, you need 7 buttons. That's it. That's all you need. Everything else is window dressing. So start jam, stop jam / lineup. This one changes points up and points down for both teams. That's it. You don't need anything else. And you can run sanction level play just fine. The way I tend to teach it with people in person is to build it up in layers. So get the basics down with the 7 buttons, and then start playing with things at scrims or watching along to YouTube videos of games and doing the scoreboard on your own at home, which is the sign of a really cool person. And it's definitely not something I had to do before coming back to roller derby after COVID, because I'd completely forgotten how to do this job. And yeah, it is not as terrifying as it looks. Yes, it's like jam timing. Everyone can see you. So if you make a mistake, it does happen. Most of the time, it is the software that makes a mistake, rather than a human error, because it is still free software that is run and maintained by people in their spare time. And they will fall over sometimes. Everything crashes at some point. But it's really easy to deal with because you just close this, have a quick timeout, start it again, and it will pick up where it was. So I'm going to do a very quick whistle-stop tour of things. If I go back to the index page, so when you have, like, Make the assumption that you have Java installed and you have a copy of the scoreboard to hand. I did a video earlier, which I put in the Facebook group, just on how to get to that point if you're not a nerd like I am and quite as technologically savvy. Yes, can do that. There you go. I've got a massive widescreen display because, again, nerd. So once you have run scoreboard, I hope that is a bit better to actually visualize.
I think it'd be better if we could see the web browser, Cal, rather than the Java bit.
What?
Well, we can't see the web browser, right? And that's probably the more useful bit.
I'm a professional and I know what I'm doing.
That's good. Nice.
Right. There's a lot of options here. You don't need most of them. A lot of features on here are, some of them are still experimental. So the jam timer one is useful at practice. It allows you to use your phone and run scoreboard if you are in a place where you can have a scoreboard set up. So like Rainy City used to have the Thunderdome, where they had a projector permanently mounted in the ceiling, and every Sunday scrim they had a scoreboard up running, which was great to learn on because it's where I cut my teeth as a scoreboard operator. Pardon? What was that?
Sorry, thought I was on mute.
No worries. Where was that? Yeah. So a lot of it you don't need. It's extra bits have been added over the years, and that makes it look more intimidating than it is. So penalty tracking, lineup tracking, and PLT. That is, if you've seen me around with at tournaments and the operators and some of the NSOs have been using tablets, they are doing electronic penalty lineup tracking, which is great, but not really in the scope of today's 101 how to get this working in a game day without crying or setting fire to the laptop or projector. Couple of most important pages are your scoreboard operator panel, your main scoreboard display, which I'm going to open in a new tab. That operates by hitting F11 to get up to full screen. And you would, at a game day, am I assuming too much by everyone knowing how to have multiple screens? So not just duplicating your laptop screen, but actually having multiple screens. Excellent. We'll go from there. So yeah, you just open that in a new tab, drag it over to the window as necessary. And I have just closed the wrong thing. Because again,
this is an accurate simulation on how scoreboard happens in a day.
Honestly, sometimes it is like this. Sometimes it all goes weird. Really, Kaleigh? Right, that should be up. And one of the other useful pages is your games teams rule sets in managed data. So you can, if you are the head NSO and you're setting this up for your NSOs, which I think is most case. If I am scoreboard operating at an event, even if I'm not scoreboard operating at an event, I'll usually set it up because I'll usually have my toys in the car anyway. So if the head NSO wants to use them, they can. You can, if you have the stats books to hand, you can pick a stats book. I am going to go into the folder that I should be in, which is in documents. And I'm going to pick I will pick a game. There we go. Stats book. So you can import a stats book I think I've picked a completed stats book, which is unhelpful. If it's a game that hasn't happened yet, you can import a stats book, and it should appear as a game. And again, there we go. This is an accurate representation of how this works sometimes. So the first one I loaded was London Roller Derby versus London Roller Derby. This was the scrim they did a couple of months ago. So I now have that game prepared, and if I edit it, it should have pulled through all of the skating officials, the teams, their colours, and it will default to using the Woofer rule set, which honestly, unless you're running a sevens event, you won't need to touch. So we can then go into the scoreboard operator panel, which is where the magic happens. The first thing you'll see is the operator screen. That is, you can make up any name you want. It's just that is how it remembers your key bindings and settings. So it's more useful when you have multiple operators, say it's a triple header or you're at a tournament or something like that. Or if you are always doing scoreboard, like I do, I have a copy. I have like a master folder that has all of my keybinds set up. So when I come into main, this isn't from that master folder because I'm going to show how to do keybinds in a minute. It would then bring up all of my keybinds. You can bind every single one of these buttons to a keystroke, which is very useful if you've got an old keyboard knocking about. There's many different layouts. Some people prefer a two-hand layout. I use, I'll pop a photo in the chat later, or the Facebook group later, of I have a custom controller that I made from a split keyboard because, again, inveterate nerd. So I can control entire games' scoreboard and scores with one hand. But that is not, again, not at this scope. But if you've got a spare keyboard, highly recommend looking at different people's layouts online, and working out a way of making the keyboard work for yourself with some. I use cloth gaffer tape on keys as and then writing on with a Sharpie what that key does. So like start jam, stop jam, +1, -1, etc., etc. So we will go with a quick whistle stop tour of buttons. So start jam, that one's fairly obvious. Let me actually start that game. So if you go to start new game, I promise this will be less scatterbrained in a minute when I actually get into the flow of it. You'll see it's pulled through the game that I uploaded via a stats book. So I can select it, hit start game, and it has now pulled through pink and black. So by default in the operators screen, it will tell you the color rather than the name of the team. You can change that, and I'll show you in a minute how to do that. You can also add colors. So what I will show you how I set it up to help reinforce in my brain pink and black in this instance. So start jam does what it says on the tin, starts a jam. You don't need to do anything until your jam timer shouts that first 5 seconds, and then when they drop their hand, hit start jam, the game will start automatically. You don't need to start a period clock or anything like that. It will start automatically as it has done now. Then the next button is stop jam. Again, sort of does what it says on the tin, but this is a button that contextually changes. So you saw at the beginning before I hit start jam, it said lineup, and it would have started a lineup clock, because there are some groups of officials who prefer to start their game that way. They will hit 30 seconds before the first whistle start, and their scoreboard operator will hit lineup, which will start a lineup clock so that the teams can see, they've got their 30 seconds to get on track, and when that hits 30, game starts. And my waffling has actually been useful. So I've gone past 30 seconds on the lineup, And I hope you can see that the start jam and the timeout buttons have gone orange, indicating that either we've gone past the 30 seconds of the lineup time, so why haven't we either gone to a timeout or started a new jam? Or you could do what I did at Mech last week and forget to hit the start jam button until I looked and went, oh, start jam. So started a new jam. The next button along is timeout, which again does what it says on the tin. A lot of these buttons are very self-explanatory. Timeout will always stop a jam. So if you hit timeout for example, jam stop for injury, you can hit end jam, stop jam, or timeout, and it will stop the jam. And you would then select call for injury. You can end a timeout, which will then drop you back into a lineup clock. Again, this is more European way of running the scoreboard. Don't tend to see it so much with the UK officials. And if you have gone, oh, that was a mistake, I didn't mean to end that timeout, the fourth button on the top is the unend timeout button, or the undo button. You can only undo one thing that you've done. So in previous versions, you used to be able to just hit undo and it would look at the past options and just undo what you've done. So if you're in lineup and say, for example, you hit start jam early, it says unstart jam. So you can undo it and it's like it never happened. And then next row down, we have points and trips. So the new version looks at, it works in 4-point passes, essentially like you would be doing the paperwork. So you can either add points one at a time or remove them one at a time, or this row here are your speed points. So you could have 4 points or 3 points or 2 points or 1 point. And you'll notice as I'm doing that, the overall score isn't incrementing. And because you haven't then gone 4 points, add trip. And you can see on the paperwork where my mouse is that's generated, it has moved over. The dot has moved over to a new box. And again and again and again. And this is a little trap you can fall into with the newer versions of CRG, in that if you go, oh, that pass wasn't 3 points, it was 4 points, you can see I'm hammering the -1 button and nothing is happening other than the trip points button is coming up to 0, because the scoreboard software is going, well, you're in this pass and so far no points have been scored in this pass, so you can't remove any. So to get back, you would hit remove trip, and then you can adjust points as necessary. Waffling, what am I waffling? So you've got both teams. It is mirrored. I set up, when I had a 2-hand setup, I also had my keybinds mirrored so that the same fingers on each hand would do the same thing. So that my index fingers would go +1 point, my middle fingers would be lead, and my ring fingers would be -1 point. And then buttons in the middle corresponding to the top row. At 2 minutes of jam time, it will automatically go into a lineup clock. So when you have a jam that does run for the full 2 minutes, don't worry about having to hit stop jam. It will do it automatically. Next row is about timeouts and official reviews. So by default, obviously, each team has 3 timeouts, 1 official review. Let's say, for example, Pink called an official review and they have a conversation, and this is very unrealistic because when does an official review when is it ever this quick? And they have won their official review. It might have been a cut on Black Jammer, etc., etc., etc. It will then show as retained. And if I bring up the score rollery derby, if I bring up the scoreboard thing, which I think you can see, I can't actually see my preview. you will see on here that whilst London Roller Derby has a pip in this box, which signifies your official reviews, London Rollery Derby has a plus, which says that they have won their official review. If they haven't retained it, it will go away when the jam starts. So if I flip back, you can now see that has gone. Whereas if I hit retained, it is a plus sign. So your team timeouts will show up as a flashing dot. So the 3 pips on the score page, the display show how many team timeouts you have left. Sometimes with projectors, they will cut the edges off, especially if they're older projectors, and you will quite often lose the pips. And a quick way to fix that, whilst I remember, because I will forget about it otherwise, is to go into the settings tab under main display settings, where it says live scoreboard. Change your side padding. So I'll put 8% side padding on. You can now see everything has been squidged in a bit. It's a bit of a quick departure, but I would have forgotten about it otherwise. I do have some loose notes, and I've already gone way off course from where I was going. So that is your timeouts line. Then the next line below that is more for the paperwork that is generated than anything else. So let's pick a jammer and a pivot, and start a jam. And pink team does a star pass, so 1-9 becomes the jammer. As you can see on this row, it has auto-generated the star pass row. And if you hit it by accident, you can click it again and it goes away. That will also change the names on the actual projector display. So if we can see that Jasmine is jammer, and then I hit star pass, and it swaps to Medusa. That is on the other side of the team, because like I said, the display is mirrored. The only bit that isn't mirrored, and it bugs me to this day, is your lost lead, call, injury, no initials. I understand why, but when everything else is mirrored, it's just a bit weird. So lead jammer will take that star pass off. We'll show that lead jammer on a jam. You've all seen this at games. The jammer's name will flash. Lost lead, which much with the regular scorekeeping paperwork, lost eligibility for lead. Your scorekeepers should be feeding you the information. I have a bad habit when I'm scoreboard operating of sort of giving the information out. The way it's supposed to go is your scorekeepers tell you what has happened and what is happening, what points have been awarded, who called it, etc., etc., etc. Don't do what I do at games. I will sometimes just narrate the game as it's happening and make my scorekeepers feel a bit redundant, which is not the most professional move in the book, and I'm getting better at doing it. Tangent. So lead, lost eligibility for lead. If you are running the fancy tablet system, that will automatically, as soon as the penalty gets input for the jammer, they will automatically lose lead. So I have had newer scoreboard operators who have had a slight panic because I have entered a penalty and they're seeing things change on their display. And yeah, it's the same with jammer and pivot numbers. If you're doing line tracking or penalty line tracking, when you select those using the tablets, it will automatically select them in the scoreboard software because it is all running off the same server. But anyway, back to the annoyingly not mirrored buttons. So we then have call, which like the call box on the paperwork, they called the jam. So if I start jam and let's say black got lead, and then you can either hit call and it'll stop the jam, or if you hit stop jam, it will assume that the lead jammer called the jam. If the jammer didn't call the jam, say the jam was called for injury, clicking the injury button will also highlight both sides and fill it in on both pieces of paperwork, and it will also take away the call button. And then the last button is no initial. So didn't get out the pack. And I've seen a lot since we've come back from roller derby of, I'm going to put that in timeout because it bugs me. A lot of got lead, immediately got recycled, called the jam, and therefore had a no initial. So that one you would have to put in. So if I start jam, say black got lead, and they've been recycled and they're still on their initial pass, they call the jam, you then have to manually input that. But that is only if you want to get a stats book paperwork out of the electronics scorekeeping. It's not the biggest thing in the world if you forget to do it. To be honest, I'd ignore these buttons with the exception of lead until you're more comfortable with the software. Then we have, next row down is your jammer numbers, and that is as simple as these are the numbers of your jammers. It used to be in older versions a drop-down box, which was problematic because if you had bound spacebar and you were still clicked in that and you think you started the jam, you haven't started the jam, you've just opened the box again. So now it increases the button count, but actually it's much easier to just look along the row and select them than it is to scroll through a box, especially if you've not whittled the roster of 20 down to 15. There does exist box buttons. If you are using penalty tracking, those will go away. They will automatically be hidden. Some folk like to use them. So say, for example, pink gets lead and skater jammer has a penalty. You can hit box and it will automatically mark them as lost lead. Same way as entering a penalty. Some folk choose not to use them. It's personal preference. I don't. But it comes down to personal preference. If it makes your life easier as a scoreboard operator, then yeah, do it. Next row down, we have our various clocks, which are fairly obvious, I should hope. If you ever need to change something, so let me go into a timeout, and the jam timer has noticed that there is a discrepancy in your period clock, so their backup period clock and your period clock. Most jam timers will discuss with you before the game on how they prefer to signal, like up 1 second, down 1 second, or what have you. A lot of jam timers get taught that if there's a discrepancy of more than 4 seconds, 3-4 seconds, then they will change it. After that, like below, like 0 to 3 seconds discrepancy between the stopwatch of the jam timer and your period clock that is visible, that usually washes itself out over the course of a game. If there's a bigger discrepancy, say for example you've forgotten to hit start jam or you've not hit timeout and the period clock has been ticking down, you can click on the time and then you can set a new time. So, for example, the jam timer runs over and says, my clock says 20 minutes and 30 seconds. So you literally type it in, then click set. It's that simple. You can do the same for all of the clocks. You can fudge. So the plus and minus one buttons here are fudging by a second. But you can also click in and actually change the time as needed. You only really tend to do it on period and on your intermission. So let's kill the period timer to 5 seconds. Start jam. Stop jam. The intermission timer has started. But if the team the host bout manager runs up and says, "Oh no, we're in 10-minute timeouts," you can click and then just be like, "Okay, 10 minutes," and change it that way. Little things that are as much window dressing as all of the other buttons that aren't outside of your start jam, stop jam, timeout, scores up, scores down. Everything else is nice to have, don't necessarily need it. So I'm going to make it so that is about to tick down, and we're at period 2. So much like the first period, hitting start jam will start all the clocks. If you get to the end of a period, let's set that to 15 seconds, and a jam ends, and there is less than 30 seconds, these two fields will go red to highlight that you need to have your finger over the timeout button if someone wants to extend the jam. Extend the game one more jam. That is a thing that wasn't documented originally and freaked a lot of people out, myself included, the first time they used this one. When all of a sudden you're like, the game's nearly finished. Why has it gone red? That is a quick whistle stop tour of this page. The buttons along the top are little buttons that are useful as the game goes on. So you can have it set to auto end jams or not auto end jams. You can have it replace on undo. So I believe you can have it. I don't actually know what that button does. I've never used it. I've never felt the need to press it in a game. Show start and stop buttons, so you can manually start clocks, stop clocks. You don't use those anymore. They're there as a legacy thing. Some people used to manually start a lineup clock at the end of a timeout before we had the end timeout button that would bring up the lineup clock. That's an important thing to remember. End timeout restarts the period clock. So if you have had a timeout, let me set that back to 5 seconds. Start it. Timeout. If you were to start, if you have hit end timeouts and the period clock ticks up, you may have to just fudge the time on and then hit timeout immediately. Because otherwise, when the lineup clock starts ticking, the period clock will also start ticking. So in this case, we are going to go into a new jam, and jam has started. The clocks will then start again and run down accordingly. Next along the line is the tab bar, which literally just turns off if you are running a laptop that has a smaller display. This one is a useful one to get some real estate. Start a game. You can, as shown earlier, I started this game that we're running via the prepared game, but you can also just go, okay, Southern Discomfort versus Roller Derby Toulouse. We'll have to rule set, start game. And it will start a whole new game. And then at the end of the game, you have your end of period controls. So when I always forgot to do this for about 6 months, would be to hit official score at the end of the game in order to make it say final score. You get teams like going wants to take a photo in front of their scoreboard going, come on, we're waiting for it to say final score. And it just says unofficial score. Or in this case, time to derby. And this is also how you start the dreaded overtime clock, which I can't do because we're not at the end of a game. Overtime jam rules. if any of you watched the Five Nations Showcase weekend and saw the Tyne and Fear versus the Inhuman League game, we had an overtime jam in that. 2-minute jam, no lead jammer, jam runs for the whole 2 minutes. If you still have a draw, keep going. Hopefully it doesn't happen to you, because it's terrifying, especially when everyone's looking at you, especially when you then make a mistake, which I did at the Five Nations Showcase. That's one of those moments where scoreboard is a little bit terrifying, because people are looking at you, and the scoreboard is the window to the game almost, but you shouldn't be scared of it. Like, it's roller derby, we're all going to make mistakes. The skaters make mistakes, referees make mistakes all the time because it chose to referee, and NSOs make mistakes. Like, we will mess up. Sometimes messing up is a bit more visible, and you just got to learn to go, yeah, I messed up, crack on, which is easy to say, difficult to do. Little tangent, I know Lee's heard me say this a couple of times at boot camps, but one of the biggest things I can teach as a more experienced official is on how to not let one mistake ruin the game for you, or ruin the weekend for you, or what have you. In a previous life, I used to be a live sound engineer, and I was doing a large festival that had the Killers closing, and they would just come back on stage for their encore, and I had forgotten to unmute the vocal channel. I had 120 really angry people throwing bottles of, let's euphemistically say, beer at the sound tent, because I'd spent 10 seconds going, why can't I hear the vocals? The vocals, oh, he's singing, I can see he's singing, and then realised I'd not hit a button. And like, for me, that's a much bigger messing up than accidentally getting the score wrong at the end of a high pressure roller derby game. And like, that festival weekend, that got into my head for about 3 years, and I used to dread doing live sound at large festivals for that reason. But you've just got to get on with it sometimes. Just got to swallow your pride, accept that you've made a mistake, and crack on. Ramble over. Right, so keybinds. I mentioned before, people have different key bindings. I think someone posted in a picture of theirs in the chat as an example. It is ludicrously easy to set key bindings in CRG. You hit edit key control, and then you literally mouse over buttons and hit a button on the keyboard. So start jam, W, stop jam, E. You don't have to click the button, you just hold your mouse over it, and Bob's your uncle. These are case sensitive. So the way I have mine set up is for economy of like actual available finger space. I have my buttons so that I have a shift key, which acts as the undo key, as it were, separate from this button up here that says undo. So if I want to take points off, I simply set it to capital D, so that I can put my thumb on the shift key and then press the appropriate button I want to do the opposite action of. So lowercase s, uppercase S, and that doesn't work for all people. Some people like having separate buttons for each thing. It is entirely up to you, and I highly recommend playing with lots of different. There is no one right way to do this. Play with lots of different setups, what feels comfortable for you, and when you find something that feels comfortable, muscle memory. load games on YouTube, watch games, and scoreboard operate alongside those games. Because not only will it get you more used to the software and weird shit the software does outside of a game, it also means that when you rock up the game with your keyboard, you can sit down and not have to think about what your fingers are doing. And I know folk, for skating officials, one of the biggest things that I have heard newer skating officials say is they have to think about what their feet are doing, so they can't think about the technique of the rules that they're applying and what they're looking for, the metrics they're looking for. And it's the same with this. It's the same with all the NSO roles. If you don't have to think about what you're doing, you can concentrate on doing your job better and being more effective. And in this case, having snappy point changes, start jams, stop jams. So at MEC, my jam timer and I went through the entire weekend without having to make a single score adjustment, because I wasn't, not a single time adjustment, sorry, because I wasn't having to think about where my finger was at 5 seconds and where the stop jam button was. So we were always in sync within a second or two, which is reasonably rare, especially over 8-9 games of a tournament weekend. And then when you're done with your key controls, you just click the button off so it's no longer green. And now W will start a jam. I can add points, and then I can remove points by hitting shift, etc., etc., etc. Some people prefer using a mouse. I think those people are bizarre, but you do you. If it works for you, go for it. Like I said, there is no wrong way to do this. There is just lots of right ways to do this. A couple of good habits to get into while scoreboard operating is at 5 seconds, stop pressing buttons. Have your finger either with the mouse over the start jam button or over the button that you bound to your keyboard. And at that 5 seconds, as long as you are ready to rock, ready for the jam to start, you and your jam timer will have a much better time, and people won't be going, the scoreboard's not working. Why is it not working? Usually skaters who... No one listens to skaters, do they? I'm kidding. We listen to them. We do. And a habit I got into from the bad old days when we had the drop-down boxes instead of the buttons of jammer and pivot numbers is I would, at 5 seconds, come out of anything that I was clicked on, and I would click in the middle below the official timeout button. Yeah, fair. Just so that I know that my mouse button isn't focused on any one button. It is there, it is in the middle, it is out of the way. I can take my hand off my mouse, put it on my little keyboard, and I'm ready to start the jam. It's probably unnecessary now, but I still do it out of muscle memory and out of thinking. Key binds, don't bind anything to numbers. And don't bind anything to the spacebar. I have seen it go wrong so many times that I just recommend people just don't even bother. You have a lot of keys and punctuation marks that you can use, and then the shift versions of those as well. You don't need to use the numbers. Don't use the spacebar. An example of it going wrong by using the numbers. Brit Champs Playoffs 2016. It was, I think it was CCR versus Hot Wheels from Leeds. I hit what I thought was the +5 key. Instead, I put 1,000 points on Hot Wheels. And I'm glad I noticed, because, you know, a jam and a bit later, that would have become the official score of record, which would have been embarrassing. And it's little things like that you can trip you up in a game. That is it for... sorry, I'm looking at my notes. Other good habits to get into. At the end of a jam, I have anyone who's score kept with me will have heard my spiel of, all right, at the end of the jam, we have pink on 5, black are on 8 coming, and that was a 4-point jam for pink, 5-point jam for black. Coming into jam number 3, I have pink jam as blah blah blah, black jam as blah blah blah, and getting into that patter so that your scorekeepers at the end of the jam in that 30 seconds can go, no, I disagree. I have a different score than what you have up there. And it gives you time to either fix it, because you can fix so much stuff in 25 seconds. It's honestly, it can feel like an eternity sometimes. And also, it means that the game score is accurate. Your head and SO doesn't have to do game score adjustment offsets, especially if it's sanctioned play. Just make sure you confirm with your scorekeepers at the end of every jam that the jam total was correct and that the total score is correct. I can't stress that one enough. It's just a good habit to get into, and learn from my bad mistakes, because I didn't used to do that. And also doing that for me, I've got ADHD. It helps me stay focused on what's happening in front of me. If I'm narrating the end of the jam, I'm actually thinking about what I'm doing. I'm not going, ooh, shiny thing, and getting distracted by something in the distance, which has happened more than once. Right, so that is this page. Let me get a new...
Cal?
Yeah?
Can you simulate like a standing start? Like, you've never used this before, you've never installed it, you don't have any data files, because we started with a JSON file, right?
Stats book.
We sort of you started by loading a config of some sort.
Yeah, I loaded a stats book in.
Right, but if you've just starting day one, you know, how do you make that?
Okay.
How do I get teams into this thing?
Yeah. So there's a couple of ways you can add teams. So if you go back to the main page, and hit manage data, you can either add teams manually. So in this, you would add the best team skating in pink. Even goes pink. Skater name. So you can manually enter it like this.
So that was data from the main index. Okay.
The team section in the data management. In here, you can add logos. So there is a folder in every time you unzip this. There is a folder which is HTML images, team logos. I will put some images on this in the Facebook group, but you can add logos in, she says, drawing it out. Most of the time I don't tend to bother anymore. So just because you don't always have the biggest projection screen, and if you can have the name up on the screen as opposed to a small image and a smaller name, for me that works better. But you can add logos. I have added it to the wrong game. Some of this stuff isn't intuitive, and I can only apologize. It's getting better. We're working hard on making it better. But yeah, it's free software developed in people's free time. And stability is the main focus at the moment, as opposed to necessary user friendliness. So I have copied the London logo into the team logos folder, and it now appears as an option for me to choose. You can actually manually enter, you can upload files and it will copy them into that folder as well from this page. The next button in the team management page is alternate names. So I always set it up with an operator name, which is what you, the scoreboard operator, see. So in this case, pink, scoreboard display, best team, other things, don't worry about them, because it's stuff that, again, is out the scope of this video. And then you can choose colors. So I will always add a color to the operator name. So, and I do it in the form of setting a foreground color. So let's go with a pink, and then a glow color. So I usually pick something contrast-ish. That will highlight the color, but not necessarily overshadow it, as it were. So I've put that in. I'm going to go back to the scoreboard operator panel. And as an example of the login from earlier, if I log in with maimed, it has picked up my keybinds from earlier. So if I start a new game with the best team versus Mannequin Beasts, for example, go to current game, I have now got, you can
Sorry, can you do that again, but slower, please?
Pardon?
Can you do that again, but slower?
Yeah. So you can do this either via the team page. So colors, I'm actually going to change that color because it looks really fuzzy to a darker one. And your foreground color is lit like the color of the text. Background is the highlight color, essentially, is the best way to describe it. Like you've used a highlighter pen. So I'm going to pick a hideous color to go with that, and you'll see what I mean in a second. And then glow is literally, as you can see, there's sort of a fuzzy blackness about it. This is why I don't use a highlighter color, but that is a good example to see the different color options you can have, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but how did you get London in there?
Oh, so there's two ways to do it. You can click upload.
No, I mean, how did you start? How did you configure the game?
Oh, that's what you wanted. Right.
Yeah.
Start your game button.
Because I want you to imagine I've turned up for a game and someone says, please key your scoreboard.
Yeah,
and you've
fair
got
enough.
nothing. You've just got, you'd have to do all of this.
Yeah. So start your game. Pick the home team.
Right.
Pick the, let's go Bandits this time, away team. You can set a start time, which is bound to your the clock of the machine running the game. So if I say start at 8:20 this evening, it should come up with a time to derby of 2.5 minutes, which it does. And that will then pull through the data that's in these team names. And this isn't me endorsing London. This is literally the first team logo I had to hand. Personally, I prefer not to use team logos. So if we go into the Teams tab on here, I would remove that. Let me get rid of that hideous green color. And you can add a scoreboard color.
So this tab is for the live game that's in progress.
This is the game that is happening right now.
Right. Thanks.
So I can add a scoreboard, and if I use the same pink, so I will usually pick white as the text color, and then in this one I do actually want the highlighted approach, because you can then see you have pink, you have black. It is one of those little tweaks that actually makes it more readable and more accessible. If you've got audience members who don't necessarily have the best eyesight, if they can see a big pink blob, they know that that is best team, for example. if that makes sense. So the Teams tab will change things in the game. So I can add new skaters in here, and it will update the actual game that's in progress. So it is useful if in a timeout you have, I would never do this when a jam is actually live. I would always do it in a team timeout or a long like a first review, what have you. If we go, as the score team go, oh, I don't have skater number 456 for pink, you can go over to the Teams tab and add 456. You don't necessarily have to put a name if you don't know the name at that point. You can pop it in, and it will then be available as a skater to select in the jam room pivots. And as this time to derby clock is ticking down, when it hits 0, it won't start the game automatically. The game does not start until you hit the start jam button. So if I go here, time to derby, ideally at that point, your jam timer will blow a rolling whistle and you get the game started. But it won't start the game automatically, which I used to be terrified of it doing. So teams, this changes. This is exactly the same options as we had with the edit team page, like this one. But you have both teams, home and away, or high seed, low seed. You can add attributes to skaters. So name skaters, for example, could be the captain. Skating could be the alt captain. That I can honestly say I've never really used it, so I wouldn't bother with it. Just leave it as the skater flag. If you're doing a multiple team tournament and it is being broadcast, that is when it gets used. And in which case you have someone like me who's already set all of this up. You don't need to worry about this bit. Next tab along is the rules tab. So this is usually the game that you're playing. You can potentially mess with things, but if you have used the WFDA default rule set to start your game, which this has, you can't change anything, but you can look through and go, okay, I have 2 periods. I think I can change. Oh no, I can change things. I can say, okay, this is a 3-period game, and it will have 2 half times. Instead of at the end of period 2, it going to unofficial score, it will go to halftime for the 3rd period. You can change the duration of your periods. Honestly, I wouldn't touch this because you can get into trouble. Just because there's a lot of scary looking things that outside of a challenge team game like Sevens or Survival, if that ever came back from the dead, long may it die. You can put custom rule sets in. You can even change the number of penalties. Yeah. There is a lot of damage that you can do by accident. So just pretend the rules tab doesn't exist. IGRF. This is one of those ones, if you have run the whole game data suite, I can give you a stats book at the end of the game, a completed stats book that just needs sanity checking by the head and SO before giving to teams. Don't worry about this tab. This tab is, it's not window dressing. This is if all the buttons on the controls page are window dressing, the IGRF tab and the ability to export a stats book is the special thing you have to ask the shopkeeper for. By all means, have a play. The wiki is getting much more comprehensive, which is available on the GitHub page that you download it from, and it does give you fairly comprehensive instructions on how to set up the ability to download a stats book at the end of the game. But for your everyday league, everyday weekend double header, don't bother with it. I don't. Sheets tab lets you look at the scores that have been generated so far. So if I load, I'm just going to stop this game quickly and load. If the best way to do this is going to Game Teams Files. Oh, it doesn't have any of the games. Problem is, I'm doing this on my PC and not my personal laptop, so I don't actually have any completed games, I don't think. No, so the Sheets page will allow you to look at the paperwork that's been generated so far. So you can have both scores up there. So let's start a jam. Let's put some stuff in there. Lead 4 points, 4 points, 4 points. And they call the jam. If I go over to the Sheets tab, you can now see that it is filling out, much like underneath the clocks, you have the live generated stats book. You can see in the Sheets tab the same thing, but it's the best way to describe it is it's in the right order. So when you start a new jam on this page, the stats book is always the most recent stats book is at the top, and it's sort of you're going down in reverse order. Whereas I keep going to a different tab rather than this. It is as you would normally look at the scorekeeper's score paper. So I use this in timeouts to quickly go through with my scorekeepers and just make sure we're all on the same page. We have the same number of star passes, same number of points on each line, and that they can check their lost lead, call, injury, no initial boxes as well. Or I can check mine against theirs. And if you're feeling nosy and you do have me and my tablets there, you can look at the penalties that have happened as well. And you can even add penalties, but don't do that because the NSOs operating it will be grumpy at you, as will your head official if you start messing with stuff that the teams can potentially see. And then finally, the settings tab. The only real thing that you will ever need to touch on this tab, as described before, is the live scoreboard under main display settings and your side padding, just to build in a bit of side padding so that your scoreboard display isn't cut off on the sides, and the teams and their benches can actually see how many timeouts the other team's on or they're on, etc. That is a very quick and dirty how to scoreboard. Did my rambling make sense? Has anyone got any questions? And there is no such thing as a stupid question, unless you're Lee.
We're not friends anymore.
We are. I love you, really. I am looking at doing a more put together version of this before the Five Nations season starts next year, just because I am aware of how many new officials we have in the sport, or officials who maybe want to try this for the first time, or they are the league's official, and by default, yes, I will in a sec. I will go back through that. Yeah, having a resource for folk. Sorry, I can't read and talk at the same time. Because my brain is melting and made of cheese. living with chronic pain is fun. If you are in a position where you are at a game day and the scoreboard is just not behaving, or it's the first time you've looked at it, feel free to reach out on here or on Facebook. I am more than happy to help folk. Like, even if it's just, I've forgotten how to do this. Please reach out to me, ask me questions. Again, there's no such thing as a stupid question. And roller derby's fun. If you don't enjoy doing this, and after a few goes you still don't enjoy doing it, don't do it. There's NSO roles I don't enjoy doing, and I try to avoid them when and where I can. But this is a rewarding NSO job. So, like I said, yes, if you mess up, people notice you, but you are the conduit through which a lot of the game statistics are broadcast. And that's quite rewarding. Especially at the end of the game when you're trying to tear everything down and teams keep coming up and taking pictures in front of the scoreboard. You do get a little bit of a, like, oh, I did that in my heart, as in your head as you're at the end of the game. But right, soppy nonsense over. Liz, I will go with the cold start first. So let's say you have been given a laptop with CRG loaded, and the head NSO is sort of connected to the projector, and then just left you to it, which is how I first did this, which was really fun. I got to learn by doing it the wrong way a lot. So you would hopefully have the actual... So if I go back to sharing my whole changing windows on my stream, so hopefully the official has left either open the folder that the CRG session is running in. Yes, I will have a look at that in a sec. Yeah, I will go through that in a moment. So let's say, for example, I'm the head NSO, I've left the laptop open, and you have a folder with all of this guff in it, and not much clue on where to go from there. So I'm assuming that it's a Windows laptop. As I said earlier on Facebook, I try to avoid Mac like it's the plague, and I haven't run Scoreboard on Linux for quite some time, so I'm not as au fait with running it on there, but once it's running, it's exactly the same. There's no difference. It's actually getting to that point. So for Windows, you just double-click Scoreboard Windows, which should open a dialog box like this, which says CRG Scoreboard version 5.0.4 in this example, loaded, auto-saved from Blair, and then a bunch of network information you don't need. So at this point, you would open browser of choice. I am using Firefox, but you can do it in Chrome. You can do it in Explorer if you really want, which is just Chrome with a fancy wrapper. And you would then navigate to localhost, or one word, :8000. Hit enter, and it comes up with CRG Scoreboard. I am going with the assumption that the teams are already in the game. So Scoreboard operator panel, log in with your name. I use mained because this doesn't like it when you put punctuation marks in. It won't save anything to the profile. So as I've logged in there, you can see it has brought up my usual keybinds, because this is a game file that I set up a couple of months ago. Ignore the massive number on intermission. So I'm going to stop that clock. That is purely because I have loaded a game that was several months ago.
What do
This
you mean?
is your
You
main
just
operator
started
page.
it up though.
You are?
But you just fired up the application, right? You didn't load up any data.
No, but this is would have been better for me to do it with a completely blank. Good point, Lee.
It's okay. It's my day job to shout at people doing this.
I don't normally talk to so many people. I'm a Linux engineer. I shout at machines all day. Right, so we have absolute basic setup. In this case, we're going to go with the default teams of black and white, just purely because they're there. So in this approach, we're assuming that at least the teams and the skater numbers are in the game. I am very quickly... How do I get to that blank page? Right. So, how do you mean, Liz? From running the scoreboards, from the point of running the Java app, or getting to this page?
So, if I've got this screen in front of me now, how do I get a blank game up?
Right. So, scoreboard operator panel. Log in with login of choice. This is a completely blank game. So you can see it is black versus white.
So is black versus white always in there?
That is the default game. So there is always a black and a white team, so that you can get it up and running, because most leagues will tend to scrim in black and white or some iteration thereof. Lee, I know where you live. I will come and throw things at your house. It gives you out of the box. You're able to give timing and scores at a scrim. Not much else.
If you do nothing else, you can start just by opening up, hitting that button.
Yeah.
There you go. You can start with your start, stop, add points.
Yeah.
It's only then you can start adding the really complicated bit or fancy stuff where you start adding this is your team name and all that shenanigans. Cool.
Yeah. So if say it was a black versus white scrim, and as has happened a couple of times, we haven't known exactly who's going to be on which team before rocking up to the scrim, or who's actually coming to the scrim, you can then go, right, okay, I've got this set up, and the head NSO. All right, show off. You can then be like, right, okay, I have skater numbers, so blip, blip, add skater, blip, and blip. Professional names, obviously.
I guess all the stuff you're doing here is essentially temporary, because it's for this live game and it's not going to be saved.
It's ephemeral, essentially.
Nice. Good.
You can have it so that so if the sync changes button is lit, that will also change the factory default black and white. If you want to make it purely for the game, you just unselect sync changes and you can change things. So an example of that would be if you are, say, it's a triple header and one team is skating twice, and they're planning on running a different 15 skaters on each game, you can have the whole charter of 20 loaded. You can then start a new game with those two teams, for example, in this case, black and white, and go, well, actually, let's put some more numbers in. I can go, well, 3, 4, 5, 1 isn't skating in this game, and I can just delete them, but it won't change the master, as it will, like air quotes. I'm looking at my webcam and remembering that it's not actually on. The master black or white team document that's in the background, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But even without any skaters in, this will still start a new game. and if you don't have team names in, and it will still tell you on the scoreboard who is lead, because it will bring up lead in flashing red. And that will get you going in 99% of use cases. Hopefully you have the teams available, so you could, and if I hit the start new game button, you'll see that we have black versus white, start new game, go to current game, and it has, I deleted the two skaters who are currently still in, and it didn't change the master black and white documents, if that makes sense. Doing that way, you can also change the colors as well. So for example, we're using the triple header game example. Black team are skating in black for the first game, but they're going to be skating in green for their second game. By having the sync changes off, you can just go, actually, they're green this game, and it will update as well, but it won't actually change the master black and white files. The beauty of the way it has been written, the software, if, for example, you have a crash, so I will start a jam and the CRG client crashes, you can just restart it and it will pick up exactly where it left off. So if you, unlike an Excel document or a Word document, if you don't have autosave turned on and you turn it off, your data's gone. Unlike that, if this crashes, it just goes back to the last save, and it saves every half a second, I believe. It saves all of its, I think it's half a second, 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 30 seconds. You can, it will save in case there is a crash or a problem. The version before this one, I discovered in a game-breaking bug, which was fun. And we had to restart the client, the actual CRG software, multiple times to get through one game, which was fun. But because it backs up so often, all that data was still there. It had literally just crashed. Next down. Does that help answer, Liz? Excellent. Carol, using problem solving things, you can check first if it's not behaving. So sometimes you can accidentally. So I will hit start jam. We'll go to lineup, and you can get a example would be when a delayed game penalty is being awarded. So let's say in this instance, black had not fielded a jammer. Your jam timer has shouted 5 seconds. You are in the I must press start jam when I hear a whistle mode, and they go da 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 da, and you've hit start jam and then realize, oh crap, stop jam. If you've messed the jam numbers up, this is a slightly more complicated fix. But in this instance, we can say, okay, jam 2, if I click on the actual number, so much like with the clocks from earlier, if I click the jam number, I can either add a jam if I'm one jam behind my scorekeepers, or I can just click delete and we go back to it being jam 1. And then usually there'll be a quick timeout to fix the clock, because instead of going into a timeout, the lineup clock has, as you can see here, continued to tick. But you'd be having a brief timeout telling off black captain for not fielding a jammer. Anyway, and that's the moment in time when your jam timer can say, up 10 seconds or what have you. what other things? So same with period numbers. I can insert a period, and it now thinks we're in period 2. And if I delete that, it'll go back to thinking. If I delete the period before, it'll go back to thinking we're in period 1. Other misbehaving things. These boxes down here, the live generated score paperwork. Let's start a jam and put some points on the board. You don't always have to hit add trip, by the way. That is the thing I should have mentioned earlier. If I say hit 4 points for black, after a few seconds, it will actually just assume that that jammer is about to start a new scoring pass, and it will go to keep vamping, woman. It will go to 0 in a jam. If a jam's running, it will go to 0 a few seconds later, so you can then add a new 4 points. You don't have to hit that button. It's just good practice to hit add trip. So jam 2 has ended, and we're looking back and we go, actually, that first scoring pass, there was a no pass, no penalty. The jammer only got 2 penalties. Now, you could deal with this by removing those scoring trips and then manually re-entering them, or you can. All of these boxes are clickable, so you can click on that first scoring trip, and it will bring up a adjustments box where you can make that first scoring trip 2 penalties and add a note saying no pass, no penalty on 2 whites, and that will then be put as a comment for. You don't necessarily have to leave the comment for everyday games. It's useful to have if you have to go back through it and try and unfuck a game, if you are using this to help you fix stats paperwork. But if you are exporting stats books, it will then export that as a comment. So every single one of these buttons is clickable except jam. So skater selector, obviously I've only got 1 skater in at the moment, but you can choose any of your skaters to be jammer. They actually didn't lose that jam. They got lead, they called, or that jam was called for injury, and they got a initial pass. This is a bug. So sometimes you'll see where I have been futzing with numbers, you'll see, I don't know how well it comes across on the screen share, but the no initial pass box for that jam will have a little red dot over it. This is a known bug. This is a thing we are trying to fix. Good luck back. Like I said before you go, feel free to ask me questions on Discord or on Facebook if you have any problems. But yes, so this is 100% a bug. Ignore it. We're working on getting shut of it. And you can do an official score offset. So say, for example, actually we did make a mistake. And we've recorded. Usually you would, let me put that back to 0. Usually this would be done in previous jams. So let's start a couple of jams. And we go, oh, we've noticed in that jam it was actually 4 points. We can add an offset and a comment reason, and it will change the game score. I wouldn't touch it after that, after the jam and next lineup, because at that point the score that's bye Lee, love you really. The score that the teams and the crowd can see and that goes out on the stream, that is the score of record. So unless you're changing the jam you're in, the previous jam, don't touch that with a barge pole. It's a useful thing to have, but it's a feature that there's been some discussion over. You obviously can't change the running total. Yeah. I hope that covered your point, Carol, with like things to look at if things aren't working.
Yeah, thank you. That was good.
No worries. Any other questions? Basic Kit League starts with a projector around 3,000 lumens. If it's a cheap projector and it looks cheap and it feels cheap, it's too good to be true. If your league can afford it, investing in a decent sort of 3,000 lumen projector and a screen is very beneficial, and it will make more of a difference than you know, because in a brightly lit sports hall, you will at least stand half a chance of seeing what the hell the scores are. And to be honest, this runs on a lot of various devices. I run it on a 4 or 5 year old Ultrabook laptop. It will now run nice and smoothly, even if you have a broadcast team taking a broadcast overlay. It will run much nicer than it used to. At the Women's World Cup in 2018, it was unstable enough that if we wanted the stream that was going to the BBC to have the score overlay over it, we had to have an extra scoreboard operator as a ghost scoreboard operator. If that makes sense. So they would be a scoreboard operator who sat next to the score table, who was doing the stream, and the scoreboard operator with the scorekeepers was doing the in-house. Now it is pretty damn rock solid. You can run it on. Before I got my laptop that I'm using at the moment, I used to run it on I think 6-year-old at the time, so 11-year-old laptop now, and it ran just fine. Just make sure that you can connect your laptop to the projector in a meaningful way. So my Ultrabook, it only has USB-C outputs on it, so I have to have an adapter to go from USB-C to HDMI. If it's an older projector, it will probably be VGA only, so you may need to buy further adapters. But as an absolute bog standard, like this will get your league running games at this will get your league equipment to run games that will last a decent while. A decent second-hand laptop that's a few years old will work perfectly fine. If you do what I did and beg, borrow, and steal hardware, so if you have an employer who has a stash of old laptops, ask very nicely if your volunteer grassroots sport can have a laptop donated to them. Some of my networking hardware for my fancy toys came from similar things, and some actual theft. Don't do theft. Crime is bad, people. Don't do that. If you want to do the fancier stuff, so tablets, it's a bit more involved in setup than the scope of today. But if folk are interested in how to do games data for your local league, it is not as terrifying as it looks. It requires a little bit of setup, but once you've learned how to set it up, it adds a whole new dimension. And as a league that has the ability to do that within the league, you become a more attractive option for officials coming in from further afield, because they'll be like, oh, I've had a few people go, oh, you're at Hellfire Harlots now, are you, with your shiny toys? I'll come and officiate there because I want to play with the tablets. And it's those little edges that can make getting officials on game day much easier. like I'm more than happy to do a thing on that in future, in a similar manner, hopefully better scripted than this one, because I'm not having a good pain day, in case you couldn't tell from the slightly scatterbrained approach to doing stuff. It's all good. I've got a disability. I live with it. It just mouth do word things, brain nothing. Any other questions? Last call for more questions. And the Five Nation stuff we'll be doing will be in a similar vein to Dublin Roller Derby's old videos on how to set up and get running, and going and on a words hard brain think, doing it in such a way as assuming absolute base knowledge of I understand laptop turn on, and that's about as far. So I'm planning on doing that as an actual scripted video or video series that will be slightly less scatterbrained than this. And if you want to try this at a game day that I'm at as an NSO, I'm more than happy to sit on the score table as a scorekeeper and teach folk. Because, as I've said elsewhere, the more people I can get doing this and realise this isn't as terrifying as it looks, the more other officiating I can do. Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Liz, feel free. I will get a toast survey out at some point soon for the East Midlands Open Roller Derby game against Suffolk, which I believe is their first game as a league since they split off from Nottingham. So
yes, that's right.
Yes. As I have said elsewhere, if folk want to ask me questions in private or on a game day are going, it's not working, drop me a message. I've always got my phone on me. I'm always happy to teach folk and help unfuck stuff, which is one of my roles as a games data manager for the WFTDA, is outreach, making this more accessible, because for a long time it has been seen as like the true tech nerd role when it doesn't have to be, if that makes sense. But I am rambling. So if no one has any more questions, I think that's a good place to stop. I'm going to go and try and get some medication into a poorly rat, which will be fun. Especially seeing as she doesn't like the medication, so yay. And I will love you and leave you all.
Thank you very much.